Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3, dominate.
What's good, everybody? I'm back here again with another video, and today, as you guys can see, we got a special guest here. We've got Bay Area legend Larry Krueger, formerly of KMBR. Larry, how you doing tonight, man?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And before we get started, I know you just started your YouTube channel, The Krug Show. It's a great watch for anybody interested in any Bay Area sports, be it baseball, football, or basketball. So quickly, before we start, just let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, go to YouTube and hit go and subscribe. We've been doing it for a couple weeks, got a couple thousand subscribers to 3,000, and feeling good.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Hopefully we get him to 1,000 soon. And also for those of you who didn't catch that, just make sure you hit the link in the description. But Larry, it's been a great 49ers offseason. We've had a lot of action, not only with the team, but with the quarterback carousel obviously occurring. And then we have Jimmy Garoppolo still on the roster as of April. So how have you felt about the 49ers offseason so far?
I think it's been kind of uninspiring, to be honest. I don't think there's any move that I made that they made that made me go move. You know, they added a couple special teamers, they added a corner, but nothing that makes you go, oh, yeah, that's huge. That's a landscape changer. I guess the best move is probably the corner from the Chiefs, Trivarius Ward.
Right.
But I don't see it too urgent. To me, there's, for any positive you got from Ward, it's a huge negative that you lost DJ Jones and Kentavious Street for your D line. So, decent. I mean, nothing great, nothing awful, but losing DJ Jones, I think, going to hurt them quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Jones, Arden Key, Kentavious Street, 3 names that were key rotational pieces last year. Obviously, DJ Jones led the league in ESPN's run-stop win rate. He was one of the best run defenders, if not the best run defender in football in all of last year when you slot him alongside Arik Armstead in the interior. So it is a good loss that the 49ers definitely obviously couldn't afford to pay. DJ Jones getting $10 million, which eclipsed my initial belief of the $6 to $8 million range that I thought he'd get. So definitely a tough loss, which the 49ers hope to replicate his production with the addition of guys like Hassan Ridgeway and the reemergence of Javon Kinlaw, who hopes to be healthy. Are you somewhat excited for Javon Kinlaw should he be healthy in this rotation?
As a two-down run defender, yeah. But, I mean, he has no pass rush ability at all. And I think that's pretty clear. I mean, if that's what they thought they were getting, then okay. But, I mean, he's got 1.5 sacks in 18 games. So he's not much of a pass rusher. And hopefully that, improves over time. But he looks like pretty much a pretty ground, he's a ground game guy. He's a first and second down guy. And he's not going to give you very much pass rush based on what I've seen.
Right. I mean, when we looked at training camp last year, right, before Javon Kinlaw got injured, we saw the 49ers trying to incorporate pass rushing drills in one-on-ones for Javon Kinlaw to try and improve that pass rushing repertoire for him. And obviously the injury stalled things and he couldn't really get to like the amount of reps that he needed to become a serviceable pass rusher last offseason in training camp. So maybe he develops those skills now, maybe alongside Arik Armstead. That improves more where now both are going to be on the interior, whereas that wasn't always the case in 2020. So maybe like some of those factors will help instill some of the pass rushing ability to him. But that to me is where I'm a little more excited about a guy like Hassan Ridgeway, because to me, DJ Jones and a guy like Javon Kinlaw didn't necessarily provide that sacking ability or that pass rushing ability on third downs. A guy like Hassan Ridgeway with his build and his power in terms of bull rushing, I think that provides some sort of hope alongside Kevin Givens with that defensive line rotation with Arik Armstead on the interior.
I mean, Ridgeway might help as a pass rusher for sure. His issue is, can he stay healthy?
Right.
Can he stay on the field? And, if he can, obviously that will help. But that's his big question mark is, can he play? Can he play and stay on the field? If he can, he should help them a little bit as a pass rusher. I don't know what he's going to be as a run defender, but as he's got a little bit of quickness as a pass rusher. So he could help them there a little bit.
Do you think the 49ers should address the position in the draft in terms of interior defensive line, or are you content with the group as it is right now?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty stacked group. I mean, as far as they added Kerry Hyder, they added Ridgeway. They're almost 10 deep right now. Givens is going to give them some interior pass rush. But yeah, I think getting an interior pass rusher is definitely on their list. Where does it rank? It really depends on how you view the defense. I would rank it higher than others because I think that's an important factor. But I can where people think, okay, they have Ridgeway now, go fill some of these other needs first. But yeah, they could want the interior pass rusher, and there are not a lot of great ones in this draft, but there's a few. Perry and Winfrey and Devontae Wyatt. If they could get some guys in, they could get a guy inside who could give them Logan Hall's another one from Houston, pass rush inside. I think that's something that they'll have to look at. But I would imagine that's going to have to be either an early, that's going to have to be a second or third round thing, or they're going to have a hard fill in that position in this draft.
Right, and I agree. I mean, the names that you just said, one thing that connects them to the 49ers is the athletic ability of all the players. And the 49ers like the flexibility when you can push out while also remaining on the interior rather than just being a nose tackle. And I think that that's a value that some of these interior defensive linemen in this draft provide. And that would be helpful for the 49ers in terms of schematically, because they can rotate more players in and they can preserve some of the bodies, which alleviates some of the injury concerns that the 49ers have had, which with this team is never, ever going to just let go. Like, we've been one of the most injured teams over the last couple of years. So definitely adding more bodies and adding depth is good. Although you did make a good point in that we already are 10 deep and we are likely to add an edge rusher in this class, making it 11, which was the number we carried on the 53-man roster last year.
You can never be too deep, because if you run out of, defensive line, like running out of bullets in your gun, you move that quarterback off of his spot if you don't have the players. You can't. So it's really important that they find a good edge rusher, and that they either get Ridgeway or Givens or somebody in the draft to give them some interior rush.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at the rest of the roster, right, you alluded to the signing of Trivarius Ward, which now gives the 49ers a potential cornerback one who has played pretty well over the last 3 seasons, especially in 2019 and 2021, serving as one of the better man coverage cornerbacks. And I think that this provides a little bit of optimism for the defense, because a guy that we drafted last year in Ambry Thomas was better off suited in man press, which Trivarius Ward brings, and Emmanuel Moseley also brings physicality, which is best suited in a system like man press. So I think now it's a system that fits most of the starting cornerbacks in our group, with the ability to add a slot cornerback in the draft as well.
I don't know that it was the Niners' system to play zone. I just think that if you match up, you play man. If you don't match up, you play zone. They didn't feel like they matched up. They played zone. But if they had more guys who had that, the bump and run coverage ability, the man-to-man press corner coverage ability, I think they would play more man. I think D'Amico played a lot of zone because he felt like he didn't match up.
Yeah, and that changed of the second half of the season where we played more man, and I believe that that's going to happen a little more now with Trivarius Ward in the mix. But other moves that we made in free agency, like you alluded to, were the special teamers. Did you like the improvements to that unit, which was the worst unit on our team last season? How do you rank those type of moves?
Well, I mean, the two special teamers, Oren Burks and Odom. Both those guys have good special team reputations. I haven't studied them on special teams. Ray Mccloud will give them a returner. His issue is, can he not fumble the ball? I think he fumbled it 5 or 6 times this year. Let's be honest. If he fumbles 5 or 6 times next year, there's going to be a lot of people saying that was a disastrous addition. So for him, it's really about, can he take care of the football? If he can, he's a pretty good return guy. So those other guys are pretty accomplished special teamers. So, the special teams, if you talk special teams, as opposed to, then that's one thing. But if you talk special teams out of season, that really shows the commitment to it. So it sounds like they're committed to improving that part of their football team. So it should be improved. We'll have to see how it goes. But on paper, they look a little better.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, Ray Mccloud had a lot of volume last year. He was one of the more productive returners, albeit the fumble issue. He returned 38 punts, which was first in the NFL, returned for 367 yards, which was also first in the NFL. And then the average was still fairly good, 9.7 yards per return. That was third in the NFL. And then additionally, he was a solid kick returner, returning the third most kicks in the NFL for the 4th most yards. So he had a high amount of volume on both facets. I do think that one thing I alluded to in one of my podcasts last week was, if you limit Ray Mccloud to just kick returning or punt returning, you diminish some of the responsibility and take some of the pressure off. And now if you have 2 solid returners, one at kick returner, which they could address in the draft, and one at punt returner, then you have 2 players that can excel at what they're good at, and then it could potentially drop some of the fumble concerns from a guy like Ray Mccloud.
Possibly. Or, if he fumbles early on, he could lose the confidence. Kyle Shanahan. I mean, the one thing that Kyle Shanahan has demonstrated is he doesn't have very much patience, especially with any kind of issues. I mean, they drafted Dante Pettis. His strength on paper was he was a punt returner. He fumbled a couple times. They just never let him do it again. They went to Trent Taylor. So, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, if they brought him in, there seems to be a little bit of disconnect between the Niner personnel department and the coaching staff. They're almost their entire draft struggled to get off the field last year. So who knows? Who knows? Did they consult their coaches before they make these pickups? They should, but you would swear that maybe they don't, based on how things have gone this year. So. Yeah, if Ray Mccloud he might be an okay punt returner. If he fumbles as many times next year as he did this year, he almost assuredly will get yanked, and they'll be leaning on somebody else. Maybe Brandon Ayuk, maybe JaMychal Hasty. It's hard to say. Maybe somebody they get in the draft, but don't seem like they have very much for mistakes, especially mistakes that cost them turnovers.
Right. And that's why I think a lot of people are hoping that Ray Mccloud provides the consistency. Because last year we cycled through returners. We had JaMychal Hasty sometimes out there. We had Trenton Cannon sometimes out there. And then when he got injured, we had to go through a number of returners just because we didn't really have a consistent option that we were comfortable with. And like you said, Kyle Shanahan, he doesn't really show patience with these certain situations, especially when it's like such a small things like special teams, although they're very important. Some other moves that we made on special teams was also, like you said, George Odom. He provides now another safety to the group. But are you comfortable with the safety group going into 2022 as it currently stands?
Well, I would say no, because you have Jimmy Ward, who I think is a better strong safety than free safety. He's slated to start at free safety. You have Talanoa Hufanga, who probably is not an every down strong safety, and yet I believe he's the starting strong safety. They still haven't brought Tart back, so I don't know. I mean, personally, I'd like to see them go for a free safety in the draft and move Ward to the box safety and let him play up on the line of scrimmage, because I think they lack speed and coverage ability in the back end from that free safety position, and I think Ward is a good cover guy, but as he ages, I think he loses some ability there. And then when he does get hurt, what are you leaning on? Then all of a sudden you're leaning on Dante Johnson, and I don't know that that's where they want to be. So to me, the nickelback or the free safety or both are kind of become draft priorities based on the fact that K'Wan Williams and Jaquiski Tart may be moving on.
I agree.
K'Wan already did, of course.
Yeah. And the one thing, the one kind of negative that I had about the 49ers offseason, looking at the entirety of their signings, was that safety, because I thought with the safety class in free agency, I thought that there was a great opportunity to gain a starting caliber player at safety at a bargain price, because there were players like Terrell Edmonds, Keanu Neal, Jaron Kearse, Deshaun Elliott, Jaquiski Tart, who's still there. There were a numerous amount of players, about 8 starting caliber safeties, I thought, in free agency, that the 49ers could have picked up just one of them. And the cap of the market was there, because Jaron Kearse, one of the better safeties last year for the Dallas Cowboys, only signed for $5 million a year. And Terrell Edmonds, Jaquiski Tart, all these players are still in free agency. And right now, like you said, I personally am not that comfortable. I don't think that there's a starting caliber safety on this roster apart from Jimmy Ward, which just shows a huge reliance towards the draft. And one thing the 49ers sometimes struggle with is when they draft from need over best player available. You see a lot of the later round picks hit, but the early round picks they sometimes struggle with because they prioritize need over the best player available. And when you have a hole like the one at safety right now, I feel like they could potentially prioritize need and reach on a player rather than drafting whoever best could fit their roster at that spot. And that's why I show a little concern towards the safety position, because while George Odom did start 7 games last year, I don't necessarily think that you can fill in Jaquiski Tart's shoes immediately, because he was okay in coverage. He had a couple of pass deflections, I think 2 on the year, but he did give up 3 touchdowns in coverage. So you do worry a bit about the coverage stats, and the 49ers praise versatility. They like Jimmy Ward to play sometimes in the nickel, play sometimes at single high, but also play sometimes in the box. They like the versatility of their safeties. And like you said, Talanoa Hufanga isn't really an every down player. He doesn't provide the athleticism that the 49ers would like as an every down player. I don't think Trivarius Ward is the most reliable option coming off a long-term injury. And also George Odom, who hasn't played the majority of his snaps at safety. He's rather been a majority special teamer. So I don't know if the 49ers can operate with that versatility without a starting caliber option alongside them, especially when they employed some 3 safety sets last year.
I mean, I've got more hope for Hufanga than I do for Trivarius. I mean, Trivarius is just an athlete. He's not a safety. He doesn't take the proper instinct or angles. He doesn't have good instincts. He processes everything 2 steps late. He's just a size speed guy. If anything, I think Trivarius they ought to use exclusively this summer as a corner, because he's not a safety, and I don't think he'll ever be a safety. He's safety size, but he's never really played safety with any degree of consistency. And he's taken some of the worst angles when he has played safety. I think it was the game against Pittsburgh a few years ago where there was a pass to Juju Smith-Schuster, and it should have gone for like 15 yards, and it went for like 50 yards and a touchdown because Tarvarius Moore took just a horrendously bad angle. So Tarvarius Moore is big and fast, and he can only play corner. And Hufanga is instinctive, but he lacks speed.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like Tart is probably the best combination, which is why he played as much as he did. His drop of the interception in the last game is probably going to seal his fate here. They'll probably scapegoat him and let him go somewhere else. But based on the guys that you named that are available in free agency or that were available, he's probably the best option. But that just means they'll probably have to go in the draft, and there are good players in the draft. I mean, you can find a box strong safety a lot easier than a free safety you can cover. Invest early in the draft on a free safety you can cover. There's going to be some guys there who will be attractive as well.
I agree. And the thing is, like you said, Trivarius Moore, he is built more on speed. And the thing The one thing that I tweeted out last week that I don't necessarily believe Trivarius Ward makes this roster if the 49ers go safety early, because a guy who's built on speed, coming off an Achilles injury, that might limit the speed. And I know he's expected to make a full recovery, but if it shows some drop off in that speed, the 49ers might not be as patient, just given that he lacks most of the safety talent that they'd prefer at that position. And so that's why, especially when they carried four last year, they already have Odom, Moore, Hufanga, and Ward. That's already four. Drafting one makes it five, which means one's likely to be cut, and I feel that that could be Trivarius Moore.
Yeah, I mean, if they're, if you said what are they going to do based on what they have right now, I think they would probably wind up playing Jimmy Ward at strong, Dante Johnson at free safety, and we know that's not want to do. So,
right,
this is a position where they need to fortify themselves in the draft. They've got 9 picks, and a couple of them got to be safeties probably.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with their they can be aggressive in the draft. I know they've traded back before. They traded back with Aaron Banks, but they've also shown aggression. They traded up for Trey Sermon without a third-round pick last year. They traded up to 88, and they got Trey Sermon utilizing a fourth-round pick to move up. So they definitely show aggression. They've got 9 picks. It's unlikely that they'll draft all 9. So it'll be interesting to see whether they take a safety or not early in this class, or do they wait a little more. I have a hunch they'll take one earlier.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually think that they have 9 picks. I think they need more. If I were them, I would trade back a couple spots. I think when I look at all the needs that I've counted up for them, I've got about a dozen needs. So they really want to fill all their needs in the draft, and it looks like they do. I would say they may want to trade back and accumulate a few more picks.
Interesting. Good take. And speaking of those needs, what holds do you think that those positions are, just off the top of your head?
Well, they only have 2 quarterbacks, so they need a third quarterback. I think they could use a dynamic runner to go with the running backs they have. Though it's not a necessity, but it's a very good running back draft. I think they could probably use a speed threat, vertical threat at wide receiver to open up the field for everybody else. They might need a starter at line, either somebody who could start right away, who could start here, because they're pretty weak with Mack and Brunskill. And then they lost Laken Tomlinson at all last year. So do they have confidence in Banks? If not, they need a starter at left guard. So the other line looks pretty bad, actually. It's Trent Williams and 4 guys that are just pretty average. So they could definitely use fortifying of that offensive line. And then on defense, they need an interior rusher. They need an edge rusher. I think they could use one more fast linebacker, maybe a free who can play the deep role, and probably one corner as well. So that's a number of needs. Then if you are moving on to Wisnowski, you may need a punter.
Right.
They've fortified special teams, but
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the main ones that pop out to me, like we just talked about, were safety. I do think that they currently do require a slot cornerback. I don't think that there is one that really is that eye-opening to me right now, unless they move Emmanuel Mosley in, which I felt he had a good, strong enough season on the outside where he warrants playing on the outside alongside Trivarius Ward. So I think there's a slot corner need. There is an edge need opposite of Nick Bosa. I don't think that we have a good amount of rotational pieces, but I still think that we're lacking that one main piece. And 2 years ago, we had Nick Bosa as a rookie look up to D Ford, one of the better edge rushers. And I know the injury issues that happened with D Ford, but he was still one of the solid edge rusher back in 2019 on that defensive line. And now we have the opportunity where Nick Bosa now is the third year or the player that is kind of seen as the veteran. You can get a rookie defensive end to work alongside Nick Bosa, make that rookie's life a little easier, especially with the strength of this defensive line for sure. So I do kind of view edge as somewhat of a need here. Into offensive line, there are concerns because Mike McGlinchey, we don't know how he'll respond. I have heard that the 49ers are looking at tackle, which kind of makes it a little hesitant on how they view Mike McGlinchey coming back from that injury, the torn quadricep, of course. The interior offensive line, who's going to start there? The 49ers, Kyle Shanahan did say that he was expected to start Aaron Banks last year. Mid-season, he felt comfortable, but obviously the 49ers went on the run. So he probably fortifies one spot. The second spot, though, who is it going to be? Is it going to be Daniel Brunskill? Is it going to be Jalen Moore? We don't know. And also, there is the ability to upgrade should there be a good player that falls to them in the draft. So that's another need. Like you said, deep threat, right? We have good receivers. Deebo Samuel's an all-pro. Brandon Ayuk's one of the shiftiest route runners. Jawan Jennings is a big body. But the one guy that we don't really have that completes this unit is a full-on deep threat rather than a person who accelerates after the catch. That'll obviously open up the field for Trey Lance, who can utilize the deep threat to throw the deep ball. So I agree with most of those needs for sure. Yeah. But speaking of those needs, where do you think the 49ers should go with their first pick?
I think you already said it really well earlier that they should not tie themselves to any position, and they should play best player available. I mean, the draft is filled with. I mean, as somebody who's studied the draft is about false favorites. Everybody there is a favorite. Everybody was an All-American. Everybody was All-Conference. Everybody was the best player on their team. They're all good on paper, but the bust risk is very, very, very high. So, what position it is, and just don't expect your number one need to be plentiful on the board when you pick. Just take the best player available. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think best player available would be definitely helpful for the 49ers. And I mean, when they've done it, they've shown a propensity to just select well. They have a good scouting group. It's just sometimes they prioritize need over the best player available. Going back to 2018, their first round pick was Mike McGlinchey because they required an offensive tackle where they could have gone safety, which could have been the best player available, and a guy like Derwin James. In 2019, obviously it was Nick Bosa who was the best player available, but it also fortified a position of need at edge, which is why they took it. They also needed a receiver in Deebo Samuel. They hit on that pick as well. In 2020, rather than going in offensive tackle and Tristan Wirfs, who was there available at 13, or a wide receiver, the 49ers elected to go defensive tackle. Why? Because they traded away DeForest Buckner. That was the biggest need that they had on their board, and they potentially could have reached for a guy who had injury concerns coming out of South Carolina and hadn't really possessed much of the pass rushing effect from the defensive tackle position at 14 with Javon Kinlaw. Now, obviously, I'm not shutting the door down on any of those players, but it just shows the pattern that the 49ers have gone through in selecting need over best player available, which is why, especially now without a first round pick, I think that they have the chance to right that ship because there's going to be a lot of talent on the board. And in such a deep class at positions of need for the 49ers, such as safety, such as edge, and such as interior offensive line, I think they have the ability to potentially go best player available and take with their first couple of picks, with the second round pick and the third round picks, take starting caliber players. While they may not be star players, starting caliber players at three positions of need that can fortify their roster and put them in a position of strength going into 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing some of those mock drafts, just looking going to fall to them at 61. And in some of the drafts, the Iowa center, Linderbaum, highly rated player, he's got short arms, but he's one of the best centers I've seen in years. So, I mean, if a guy like that fell to you, I would suddenly, I would prioritize that. Or if, Devontae Wyatt from Georgia falls to you, I'd prioritize going interior rusher. So it really is about value, I think, and drafting the best player and not trying to fill in. And as long as they do that, I think they'll be fine. But if you start going for need, it could go wrong. They don't have a great of filling their needs with their draft choices. They've been very hit and miss.
Yeah, I mean, they have been. And like when you look at their pedigree, right? Obviously, the reason that their team is in the structure that it is right now is because they've gotten guys like George Kittle, they've gotten guys like Fred Warner, and when they look at and assess talent, as opposed to assessing needs, just assessing talent to see who's best available. There's a good track record for it. So hopefully that's the direction in which they go in this draft. But Larry, I was watching your show, the Krug Show. For those of you who just tuned in, make sure you subscribe to the link in the description. Go hit up Larry's YouTube, the Krug Show. But I was watching your episode with John Chapman, and you guys had a tough decision between two players who had fallen, two talented players, albeit at different positions, Christian Watson and Kyler Gordon. Now, I don't know how I'd answer the tough question, but I want to ask your opinion. Who would you go if the 49ers had both players available at 61?
You know, it's really a tough call. I mean, the 49ers have not gone corner successfully in a long time. And Gordon is very intriguing. He's a truly elite athlete. He's got great size and speed. And I think I'm intrigued by him. But, Christian, and I probably would lean towards the corner because I think I think this is a phenomenal wide receiver draft. This is the third year in a row, by the way, that the draft has been stacked at wide receiver. So for that reason, I'd probably go corner or wide receiver. The other issue, and I brought it up to John Chapman, is that if you do go Christian Watson, I love him too. I mean, he's big, 205-pound wide receiver who runs, unofficially sub 4.3. I think his official time is like 4.31. They need that kind of vertical threat, and he's got the relationship with Trey. But that's like one of those things where it can go either way. I mean, if Christian Watson's a star, then there's no problem. But what if you draft him? He's like a lot of rookie receivers, and he struggles to adapt to the NFL. Then what if Trey the ball to him? The tree between Trey could go south if they draft his college receiver, and his college receiver is not ready to play, and they start feeding him. So that would be my concern. If you felt like Watson was truly great, I would take him. But position and the way draft shakes out, I think I'd probably go for the premier corner.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough debate because obviously, like you said, there's a premier corner, which is a position in need for the 49ers. Kyler Gordon is an intriguing prospect for sure, and at 61 is one of the more valuable selections. But then obviously you have the intrigue of Christian Watson, who played with Trey Lance. And to me, I think this is definitely a tough decision because when you look at it, the point you made is the last 3 years, receiver class has been phenomenal, and I don't think that's going to change in the foreseeable future. And I think we're coming to a stage really where elite receivers or supposedly elite receivers aren't being treated the same. We saw guys like Amari Cooper get moved for just a 5th-round pick. A guy like Jarvis Landry got outright cut, and that's because you have these receiver classes just continuously cycling out, and there's just talent continuously being farmed out, as opposed to a position like cornerback, where there's going to be 20 good receivers in every single draft now, and that's what it's been for a while. So when you have these 10, 15 good receivers in a class, like there is less of a desire to pay upper-ended money towards some receivers. Hence why some teams have traded their elite caliber receivers, because they're replenishable. And while there's like such amazing talents, it's sometimes better to divert those resources elsewhere, which is what the receiver kind of argument kind of poses now, because there's so many good receivers where you can get a guy like Christian Watson, who definitely possesses intrigue at that 6'4", 208 frame with the 4'3", 640. And so he's got the size, but he's also got the speed to be a deep threat for a guy like Trey Lance. But then again, you have probably 10 good receivers after that are still available, which you can select in the 3rd round, while a guy of Kyler Gordon's caliber might not be available at 93 or at 105, which is why I'd also probably agree with you and probably select Kyler Gordon at this point.
Yeah. It's just the way the draft is laid out. And I'll tell you, to me, if they passed on a receiver early, I wouldn't fear that, because there are so many good receivers. And some of my favorite receivers in this draft are going to be day 3 guys.
Yeah, same.
And so I'm not as concerned about going for Christian Watson early on. If there's going to be other players on the board there at 61 that that I at other positions that are also positions of need.
Exactly, exactly. Because now, like Kyle Shanahan loves these athletes at receiver, and especially in this class, which is considered to be one of the fastest classes of all time at the receiver position, where you have guys like UNI's Isaiah Weston, you got guys like Kentucky's Wan'Dale Robinson running these 4.3, 4.4 40s at bigger sizes. At least for Isaiah Weston, who you can find in later rounds. So if you want athletes, they're certainly there in this class. Whereas at cornerback, while there's a good amount of talent. It's one of the deeper classes we've seen. It's still not it's not comparable to the amount of receiver talent that we see in this year's draft for sure.
Yeah. And you named one of my favorites right there in Wan'Dale from Kentucky. I really like
Mhm.
him. I was watching a video earlier today. He put up, I believe, 19 reps of 225. This is
And
a
that is
slot
great for a
receiver,
player of his
kind of a
size.
smallish guy, but man, he's got incredible strength. And he plays with a lot of confidence. So, he would be a guy that, I'd be very interested in Wan'Dale Robinson in the third round.
Yeah, that'd be a definitely an intriguing pick because a guy like Kyle Shanahan will be able to utilize that speed, get him in separation, and while Dan Robinson with that speed now can be utilized after the catch in a very good way.
Yeah.
So speaking of a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, what are some of your other draft crushes for the 49ers?
Well, there's a number of them. You name a position, and I can give you a draft crush. I mean,
All
I
right.
always like value, so I
Right.
like good players who didn't run for the stopwatch. Good players who had an injury, so they're going to be there on day 3. Good
Mhm.
players who were slighted because of some perceived weakness, or sometimes they're FCS players or Division 3 players.
Right.
There's a lot of good players in this draft, and the guys who are the cleanest, when I say that, I mean have the cleanest profiles, are
Right.
going to go highest. But then, you can still find great players on day 3 at almost every position. They'll have something about them that caused them to go on day 3. So you tell me what position you're looking for, and I'll tell you somebody that I like on day 3.
Yeah, so let's go maybe at the safety position, at the edge position to start those two.
Well, safety wise, I really love a strong safety out of Georgia Tech named Wanye Thomas.
Okay.
Really athletic. Saw him in the All Star game. Loves to hit. Um, I don't know what his 40 time is. It's probably not the greatest, but he looks pretty athletic. And he's going to be there in the 6th round, maybe the 7th round. So remember that name, Wanye Thomas from Georgia Tech. Edge rusher wise, it's a good draft for edge rushers. I think most of them, though, will come off the board early on day 3. So,
Right, in the fourth
like
round.
if you get to the 4th round, 5th round, Jeremy Gunter from
Mm,
Coastal Carolina
right.
is a really good player. I really like him. Um, Michael Clemens from Texas A&M is a stud pass rusher. He had some off-field issues that have to be investigated. Because of that, I think he's going to be there in the 5th round. Those two guys stick out to me for sure. And there's a few others, but those are two of my very favorite edge rushers who are going to be there, as I said, middle rounds.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, addressing value at those positions later in the draft can only benefit your team. And at the safety position, I do think that there are a good amount of players. A guy that I like that is pure athlete at the moment and still has refinement at the safety position. That's a guy of Sterling Weatherford out of Miami, Ohio. A guy 6'4", 220, imposing frame who can possess the box safety talent, but also has the speed around the 4.3, 4.4 range, which the 49ers can utilize because that's an athlete who can be versatile in a system that the 49ers like at the safety position, moving them around. Another guy is Florida A&M's Marquis Bell, obviously coming from a lesser known school, so that might drop his draft stock. But my guy Marco Martinez put me on. That's one of the better prospects, I think, at the safety position in this draft. So I'm intrigued by those two players. And then at the edge position, some of the day 3 picks that could potentially be there are Western Kentucky's D'Angelo Malone, a guy who stands at 6'4", 243, but he utilizes speed in his edge rushing technique. And a guy like Nick Bosa, who utilizes power, now you have the speed power combination, which is only going to benefit your team because that just provides you with different scenarios in which you can utilize defensive linemen, especially with how the 49ers like to have rotations and put out different players out there. So that's
Yeah.
a guy that I like
D'Angelo
out
Malone.
there.
D'Angelo
Yeah.
Malone's a good one. Little undersized. I think the Niners would probably
Right.
like somebody closer to 260. And
Mhm.
this guy's like, as you said, in the 240 range.
Right.
But I really like him. He's incredibly athletic. And then I do like Marquis Bell as well. Marquis Bell is a rangy safety, small school guy, but very, very athletic.
Definitely.
To me, he lacks a little bulk, and I don't know
Mhm.
what kind of a hitter he is. But the hitter element has become, less of a point of emphasis, and it's more of a coverage game now. So I mean, he's definitely an athletic guy. I like Marquise Bell quite a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it perfectly. The 49ers do like that kind of like 250, 260 kind of guy, and a guy who could potentially add the bulk to get there. And it is a guy like Myjai Sanders, who me personally, I like him out of Cincinnati. I think he's phenomenal, and I think that he potentially could drop because obviously at the combine he ran a 4.71. He was facing the stomach issues, dropped to 228 pounds, but his game size is 247 pounds, which he utilizes at Cincinnati. I know that people might not like his tape as much. I think he was utilized horribly at Cincinnati. I think he's got the potential to be a great edge rusher. He was utilized sometimes more on the inside, and he also has the experience there where now he can be pushed sometimes towards the inside and play like an Arden Key type of role. And while he might not be the best run defender, I think what the 49ers now are looking at least at the edge position, are pass rushers. And a guy like Myjai Sanders as a Cincinnati, I think fits that bill pretty well.
Yeah, that's a good name. He's about 6'6". I was incredibly impressed watching him, rush the passer. I mean, he's crazy athletic. And if you watched him, you said he ran in the 4.7s. He doesn't
Yeah,
play. He plays
he
much
plays
faster
faster.
than that on
Yeah.
film. So yeah, I like him. In fact, he's one of the guys that I would definitely consider at 61. When they're
Mhm.
there at 61, Sanders from Cincinnati, I would consider. I really like Nick Cross, a free
Ooh,
safety from
yes,
Maryland.
yes.
And Nick Cross runs in the 4.3s. And then if you
4.34.
watch his
That guy is
film, he
blazing.
played to that speed.
Mhm.
And to me, I think Nick Cross would be a phenomenal free safety for the 49ers. And I think could be a difference maker. He's one of the guys, he's on my short list of guys that I'd consider right there at 61 if he's there. And I think he'll be there at 61. They may even be able to trade back a few spots and still get him. But I'm a big Nick Cross fan from Maryland.
I agree. I mean, Nick Cross is versatile. You said it. 6'1", 210. He runs are in the 4.34, so he can just slot in at free safety. But what I really liked about Nick Cross is where he was placed over at Maryland this year. He played about 50 snaps in the slot, but he played 280 snaps in the box and 420 deep, which means he's got the free safety potential, which can make Jimmy Ward expendable and put him somewhere in the box. Like you said, use him as a strong safety, put him in the box, sometimes put him in the nickel, have him be versatile and have him play to his strengths. And that's what a guy like Nick Cross will allow a guy like Jimmy Ward to do. And they're interchangeable in which if you want Jimmy Ward to play up, Nick Cross can come down in the box. And while he's 6'1", 210, while it might seem a little smaller than some of the other safeties, he's got the speed and he's got the tackling ability. So I definitely like Nick Cross over there at 61.
I'm impressed, man. You know your stuff.
Always got to come prepared.
Yeah, no, we're both Nick Cross fans, and you watch film on guys finding the free safety who can run, and then it's not just it's also about you really have to watch the film because
Right.
when you're talking about guys who play inside, whether that be inside backers or safeties, 40 times are great. But if you don't diagnose correctly, your 40 time, if you think about it logically, you break the wrong way at those positions, you're just further away from the play. So
Right.
it's not just 40 time, it's 40 time and instincts. And if you have a
Exactly.
great 40 time and you play to that speed and you have terrific instincts, now that's the player we're looking for, right? That's the guy you're looking for. And a lot of people look at the combine and they fall in love with guys who run fast, and then they don't go back and look at the film and see, well, how good were his instincts? How many blown coverages was he associated with this year? Those things matter a ton, because in the NFL, you blow one coverage, you may get yanked. So you got to have instincts. You got to have instincts to play inside.
Perfect.
You got to take proper angles. You got to know the game. You got to be into your film study. You got to be a cerebral football player, whether you're an inside backer or a free or strong safety. You're playing on the inside part of the field. You better read it correctly. You better diagnose it correctly.
Perfectly said, because the one example that I can point to that a lot of people will know, Kyle Hamilton ran a 4.59 at the combine. People, if you're overreacting, you'll be like, wow, this guy is that slow. But then when you watch the tape, it's not necessarily that these safeties that run slower on the combine day are that bad, because they don't necessarily always run in a straight line. Some players are just not great straight line runners, but that's not always important as a safety. It's the angles that you take. It's the instincts. Can you diagnose where the play is going? Like you said, Larry, and that's what the most important part is, because you can have the hitter ability, but it won't ever be utilized if you can't actually get to the ball consistently by utilizing your instincts and getting to the correct holds. So I don't necessarily think
one other thing is that, one of the things that a lot of NFL teams emphasize is something called QABs. QABs, and stands for quickness, agility, balance, and strength. And that's really what you need, more so than the 40 time. You need that quickness, that agility, that balance, and that strength, and the combination has to work in concert.
Exactly.
So that just giving you a little insight. That's what a lot of teams will look for. And it's like, straight line speed is great, but quickness is almost really more important.
Yeah, definitely. Perfectly said right there. Now, one of the more important things for the 49ers this offseason, obviously, has been trying to get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo. Obviously, we saw at the beginning of this offseason, they let Jimmy Garoppolo have the floor. He formally gave his goodbye to the 49ers media, to all of the people, and he said, my agent and I are negotiating a trade. Now, 3 months later, he's still on the roster. So at this point, what would you do with Jimmy Garoppolo? Would you wait till he's healthy to cut him? Would you cut him right now? Or would you potentially keep him going into 2022?
It's a great question, because it's fraught with danger. If you hold him on the roster, then now you're going to have an established quarterback, albeit with flaws, Jimmy Garoppolo, who knows the offense better, competing against a young quarterback who's coming from the FCS level, who has barely played. But you want that FCS quarterback to win the job, and everybody knows it. So I think that just invites the circus to town. So I don't see that as an option. I don't think you can go to camp with Jimmy. So I think they're bluffing. So, the question is, what would happen if they cut him right before camp? Because that's really what their timeline is. They're saying, well, we don't need to cut him now. They don't need to cut him right now, because they don't have a free agent out there that they really want to sign. But by camp, they're going to want to extend Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel, and those guys may not even go on the field without a new contract. So they probably want to get that done at the beginning of camp. So then if you cut Jimmy Garoppolo on the eve of training camp, he was the leader on the team. How is that going to play with the George Kittles of the world? How's that going to play with the other players? If you cut this guy and now he has no options to start, and he's clearly been damaged by the whole process, there could be some blowback. There could be some pushback from some of the veterans in the room that don't feel like you handled the situation well or did right by Jimmy. So you got to remember, he was their leader not that long ago. So to not do right by Jimmy, I think you're risking the Kittles of the world being turned off to Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and the organization. Maybe that won't happen. Maybe they'll view it as Jimmy's shoulder just needed to get healthy. But they may view it as a hostile move by the 49ers, especially if Don Yee and Jimmy want some other path, taken. So that's a concern. So I would say trade him as fast as possible, but I understand what they want. They feel like if they have him on the roster and they bring him back, they have 2 quarterbacks they feel like they can win with. And then if he plays out the year, they say they've budgeted for it. They could let him go at the end of the year. They'd still get a 3rd-round comp pick. So I think the minimum they want in return is they want a 3rd-round pick to make sure that they're going to trade him. They probably want better than a 3rd-round pick. I don't see that team out there. And then it gets into, well, where could he go and what could you do? And
right.
It's really difficult to say what the options are. Do the Carolina Panthers? I mean, I look at Carolina as they're in a world of hurt. Matt Rule's going to be fired at the end of the year if they go with Sam Darnold. And right now they're going with Sam Darnold. So I think Matt Rule is pretty smart. I bet you he knows that he's fired at the end of the year. So they can't have Sam Darnold and Jimmy. So would the 49ers take Sam Darnold? I don't know. I doubt it.
And that's the guaranteed money too.
Would a third team take Sam Darnold? I don't know. It's hard to envision anybody taking Sam Darnold at $18 million guaranteed.
Right.
But what if you're the 49ers and you feel like, you could get Carolina to sweeten the deal, either with their 1st-round draft choice, a future 1st-round draft choice, or Christian McCaffrey, to make it more palatable, to make it more attractive to you. Then if you're the 49ers, in theory, you could take Sam Darnold, spread out his deal for 3 years, pay him $6 million. Now you're paying Darnold and Sudfeld combined $8 million. That's probably in line with what you'd want to pay your backup quarterback anyway. And now you've moved on from Jimmy, and you have 2 quarterbacks, one in Darnold that you might believe that you can rebuild his value and trade him for something greater in a year or 2. So there's that angle. We know the Niners love Christian McCaffrey. Could you imagine how good McCaffrey would be in this offense? But then you're kind of negating a little bit of the value of having a rookie quarterback by having Christian McCaffrey. So is there a deal involving Darnold or the Panthers that somehow, would be attractive? I mean, how eager, how much over a barrel is Matt Rule right now? If you really felt like Matt Rule was screwed, maybe he would rather have Jimmy Garoppolo than Sam Darnold. Maybe he feels like he could keep his job with Jimmy Garoppolo. If that's the case, maybe you could get a 1st-round pick. They picked 6th overall. Excuse me. But I don't know if that's an angle. Then there's the Browns situation. Baker Mayfield has already turned off to playing there. Deshaun Watson is assuredly going to be suspended. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen there? Is Baker would they want Jimmy Garoppolo so that their season's not lost during the suspension for Deshaun Watson? Because I don't think they're going to have Baker. Or is there a 3-team trade maybe involving Baker and Jimmy and a 3rd team? I don't know. Then there's the New York Giants, who have Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. And is Daniel Jones the answer? I don't think so. Saquon Barkley makes $7 million. Would the Niners take Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones and for Jimmy Garoppolo? I mean, they might. We don't know about Houston. Does Houston want to go with Davis Mills, or would they be willing to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo as well? We don't know. But, I mean, Davis Mills, I think, is a pretty decent quarterback. I'd gladly take Davis Mills back if I'm the 49ers and use him as my backup quarterback. So there's a lot of different kind of things out there that we really don't know the answer to. As it sits right now, I don't see the 49ers getting a 2nd-round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo, but we don't know the details going on in Carolina, Cleveland, or with the New York Giants, or with the Houston Texans, or with Seattle for that matter. I can't imagine the 49ers would trade with Seattle, and it doesn't seem like Jimmy would be a Seattle-type quarterback. They like to throw it down the field. And they're claiming they love Drew Lock, but do they? I don't know. You know, I don't. I think if you're the 49ers, I understand why they don't want to waive Jimmy Garoppolo at this point, because he could wind up in Seattle. And man, if think about it logically, if you're John Lynch and you waive Jimmy Garoppolo after all this time talking about trading him for compensation, you get no compensation, you waive him, he goes to Seattle. What if Trey Lance can't play? What if Jimmy becomes the starter in Seattle? What if Jimmy and the Seahawks have a better year than you do and beats you head to head and Lance falls on his face? I mean, these are all things that could probably get John Lynch fired.
Right.
So I think he needs to plot his next move or series of moves very carefully, because he could wind up losing his job over this if he makes the wrong move.
Well, that's a very good point. And I mean, when we look at it, there's so many options, right? Because if the 49ers have, like, they can cut Garoppolo now, they can trade him, they can try and cut him after he's injured, or like you said, they can roster him for the 2022 season. Just looking through all the options, if they cut him now, you lose 7.5 million, because there's a high likelihood that Jimmy Garoppolo will not make that 7.5 million in terms of annual salary for 2022, and that means that the 49ers can't recoup the 7.5 million, which it seems pretty evident that it's important to them. So I don't necessarily know if that's the most realistic path, but if you do cut him now, you save about 18 million. You can now sign your draft class with ease without any more restructures, which hinders your team in the future. And you can also potentially go after a guy like JC Treader to solidify that offensive line on the interior, because you have the able cap space right now, and you have players open. But then again, you can wait. You can look to cut him after the draft, or you can cut him once he's healthy, once he passes a physical. Then you make 25.5 million in savings. If players, with the amount of talent that's still in free agency and the lack of available suitors, it seems like a good amount of players might be available at that time. And the 49ers can shore up the holes that they didn't fill up in the draft through free agency with the money that they get from Garoppolo being cut. They don't necessarily have to restructure anybody. They can sign their draft class. They can budget for the Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel extensions, while also adding some value pieces at bargain prices that late in process while going into training camp. But then again, like you said, there are potential suitors for Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm not saying that there's any clear ones right now, because Carolina, Sam Darnold's currently there. Would the 49ers want to take him back? I don't know, because like you said, it likely would hinder their future plans, because they'd probably have to restructure that contract to make it about 6 to 8 million a year for this year, right? You probably put it to 3 years, 6 million per year for the guaranteed money. Would the 49ers be willing to do that just to offload Jimmy Garoppolo's contract and to gain a compensation back? If they get Christian McCaffrey, that's a solid player, but it's also at a $16 million price range, which doesn't save you doesn't save you that much money. If you get the first round draft pick, that's good, but it also seems somewhat unrealistic that Carolina would want to move. And the most important scenario to me is Matt Rule is on the hot seat. I do think that he gets fired if he has another disastrous year with Sam Darnold, but I do think that he might look to extend his stay by drafting Malik Willis at 6, because now your career kind of rides on the rookie quarterback. Similar to Kyle Shanahan and Trey Lance, your career now rides on a rookie quarterback, which potentially extends your stay, especially with a guy like Malik Willis, who might take a year or two of seasoning, because you can't fire him after 1 year. That doesn't do service to your rookie quarterback. So that also is a potential case. With Cleveland, I don't necessarily see it as realistic, just because they do have Jacoby Brissett as well, and I don't think they'd want to roster Deshaun Watson, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Jacoby Brissett when they paid Brissett backup money. The one situation where I see that could potentially open up is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the reason is Mitchell Trubisky, his contract is a two-year, $14 million deal, but essentially it boils down to a 1-year, $5 million deal that the Steelers can get out of next offseason. And Jimmy Garoppolo, like you said, right, the $5 million to $8 million range, that's that's backup level money. You can have Jimmy Garoppolo. The Pittsburgh Steelers have the cap space and the roster around it. I do think that if they fail to get a quarterback in this draft, with the necessity to compete in that division, and just with how the Pittsburgh Steelers operate, Mike Tomlin's never missed a playoff, or he's never had a losing season in his career, or how long it's been. And so with just how they operate, Jimmy Garoppolo could be a good fit, and he's a much bigger upgrade than Ben Roethlisberger last year, who completely limited that offense, while also playing in somewhat of a similar scheme. So that's the one scenario I have of Jimmy Garoppolo being traded. But I do think the likelihood is, despite the locker room issues, I do think it's that he gets cut, because if you roster Jimmy Garoppolo going into 2022 and Trey Lance does struggle early, it's going to just be an insurmountable amount of pressure because you have a starting caliber option on the sideline consistently looking over you. And I don't think that does a service, or that does right by Trey Lance in the situation, who you've now invested 3 first-round picks in and still aren't really giving him the full keys to the throne because Jimmy Garoppolo is there on the sidelines.
Yeah. I mean, you make a number of good points. One, on the Pittsburgh front, I really like Chase Claypool, and they're saying that they may move Chase Claypool. And
Ooh.
I would definitely be interested in getting Chase Claypool back if I were the 49ers. I think he's a terrific young receiver. And if Pittsburgh is tired of his act, man, I'd send him here. The other factor on the Carolina front, you got to remember this: Carolina does not have a 2 or a 3.
Or 3, yeah.
And so what if the 49ers took Sam Darnold and that 6th pick, but gave them Jimmy Garoppolo and their 2nd-round pick,
You said
61,
this on your podcast, didn't you?
and
I think I heard
maybe
this from you.
another pick in the 2023 draft. The Niners, my point is, I guess, if the 49ers wanted to, they could probably structure a deal draft pick-wise that would be equitable for Carolina, that would allow Carolina to turn the page on Darnold, bring Darnold here, restructure Darnold. They have Jimmy. You have the 6th pick in the draft. Then from that point, if I'm John Lynch, you say, well, why would I do all that? Because then the plan would be to trade 6 down the board. Start taking 6 and you trade it down. And maybe you trade it down and you trade down and you trade down. And maybe you trade 6 3 or 4 times down the board and you recoup by now winding up with the 30th pick. And in maybe 2 or 3 trades along the way, going from 6 all the way down the board, you could wind up recouping a good chunk of the draft capital that you lost by trading Trey Lance. So in some ways, I kind of feel like the Carolina thing with Darnold is intriguing. The other thing was, didn't the Niners show some interest in Darnold at some point? So maybe they believe that, that they could rebuild his value. And if you could wind up taking him, and for taking him, wind up with a top 10 pick, that would give you an asset that then you could just trade back, and you might be able to turn that into a very positive situation. So of all the options we've discussed, to me, that's the one that's the most intriguing. It's the one that's the most interesting. Even if you didn't get McCaffrey, even if you found a way to make the picks work and you got a top 10 pick, I think that's the best route, because then you can trade back a few times and recoup some of that draft capital.
Yeah, I mean, it's very intriguing. It's an extremely bold move because you're trading your 61st pick. I don't know if Carolina would be on board, but that would be an extremely bold move. You move off of Garoppolo. Obviously, you take the financial burden of Darnold, but like you said, you restructured over 3 years. You potentially extend him and let go of Nate Sudfeld next offseason. You potentially extend him, take off some of the void cap hit, the dead money hit over the next 2 years by extending him. You keep him for the next 2 years as Trey Lance's backup, while also getting a 6th overall pick, where you can select the top tier talent at that position, or like you said, trade back, get some more mid-round capital. And while you get that mid-round capital, you now are at 30, where in this deep draft, that's the bread and butter. Like from that 25 to kind of like that, like the late 1st round range to kind of like that mid 4th round range. That's the bread and butter of this class. And I think if the 49ers are able to just get the maximum amount of picks in that range, I think that sets them up perfectly for their future, because they already have 2 3rd round picks, right? They're going to have that 1st round pick in this scenario. And then if you trade back twice or 3 times, maybe you add 2 to 3 more mid-round picks. That makes it 5 to 6 selections. And in this class, 5 to 6 selections, maybe 5 to 6 starting caliber options, especially at positions of need, which the 49ers currently have, like we said, at cornerback, safety, edge, potentially at the interior offensive line as well, and potentially even right tackle if Mike McGlinchey isn't available. So you have certain positions in need. You clearly get those out of the way with this move.
Well, and as you said earlier, they've done a good job at identifying talent on day
Right.
3 of the draft
Definitely.
and after the draft. I mean,
Right.
think about it. Elijah Mitchell, 6th-round pick. Raheem
Right.
Mostert, undrafted free agent. Azeez Al-Shaair, undrafted
Undrafted
free
free
agent.
agent.
Kevin Givens, undrafted free agent.
Juwan
There's
Jennings.
the Niners roster's filled with guys who were George Kittle was a day 3 pick. DJ Jones was a day 3 pick. If you go back and look at if you know your Niner history, and you're a young
Yeah.
guy, but the greatest run that the 49ers ever had as a team was 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, in that range. That
Yeah.
5 or 6 year period. That came on the heels of the 86 draft. The 86 draft, they did exactly what I described there. They traded back, they traded back, they traded back. They wound up with a slew of players. Now, they had drafted Jerry Rice in the 85 draft. So they'd gotten their one great player, but they had a bunch of holes, and they traded back a bunch of times, got a bunch of mid-round picks, and turned that into Don Griffin, Tim McKyer, Kevin Fagan, Tom Rathman, Charles Haley, you name it. I mean, Larry
Loaded.
Robert.
Just
They
loaded.
they they built the core of their team going forward. And then what happened? 87, I think they went like 14-2, lost to the Vikings. 88, they won the Super Bowl. 89, they won the Super Bowl. 90, they went to the NFC Championship game, almost won the Super Bowl. They were still good in 91. They were one of the best teams in pro football in 92. They were in the NFC Championship game. They were in the NFC Championship game in 93. They won it all in 94. So with a lot of those same players still on the team from that 86 draft. So I guess my point would be, you know what? Maybe something should be learned from that 86 draft. You still have to make those picks work for you. You know, it's not just about accumulating a bunch of picks. You still have to draft. But they've shown an
Right.
acumen to be able to find players that fit their system on day 3 and after the draft. And I would be incredibly intrigued if they wound up with a bounty of 15 picks with a huge percentage of them coming in rounds 3, 4, and 5. I think that would be
That'd just
probably
be
the smart
phenomenal
way
for
to
them.
build their team going forward. And I think that might be their best value play. We'll see how they how they play their hand. But if I was running the show, I think I would really consider doing that.
And just to play the scenario a little more, right? If we start at pick 6 and trade back a couple of times to maybe in the mid-20s, one guy that I really, really like in this class, who I think is the best cornerback in this class, but has injury concern, is Derek Stingley Jr. And I think that when you look at the 49ers, if you're able to recoup the talent, like some players, right, fall, where they could be top 10 picks, but potentially fall. And obviously, in Stingley's issue, it's injuries. And he had the Lisfranc surgery, but he's expected to be back to normal. He runs in the 4.2s, has an exciting build, and he has some of the best hips and some of the best fluidity in this entire class at the cornerback position. You have that. You move Emmanuel Moseley to inside. You have Stingley and Trivarius Ward, two potential cornerback ones on the outside, and that just shores up your secondary in the late 20s. And what you do in the late 20s after that, guess what you do? You then have those mid-round picks, the 5 to 6 mid-round picks that you said. You address the positions that you really need starting players at, and you get starting caliber players at key positions for sure.
And then you know what happens is when you play the draft that way, you're going best player available all weekend because
Exactly.
you weren't expecting to have 3 5th-round picks or
Exactly.
4 7th-round picks or 5 6th-round picks. But now you're just taking flyers on guys that your scouts really liked. And man, the Niner scouts have been pretty hot when you look at
Yeah.
some of the flyers they've taken in the past. So to me, that's, it may not result in the most name quality draft, but it may be the best way to play their hand. And I think if they could get, if they can hit on a draft like the one I'm describing, I think you're setting your roster up to be one. They're already one of the NFC's better rosters. If they have the kind of draft that I'm envisioning, they could set themselves up to be the team to beat in the conference for the next 5 to 7 years. And I think that's probably the way I'd go.
And I mean, it's a great scenario for sure if it comes true.
No doubt.
But Larry, it's been a great show tonight. We've just reached the 1 hour and 10-minute mark. Again, thank you so much for having you on. It's just a wonder to have a guy like you on the show. For all of you, make sure you subscribe to his channel. Larry, real quick, just give the shout outs one more time.
Well, yeah, it's the Krueger Show, and it's only about 2 weeks old. We're closing in on 3,000 subscribers. So, I mean, I got to thank the audience for that. And we talk tons of Niners, tons of draft, a lot on the Giants, a little bit on the Warriors as well. And that's pretty much it. Giants, Niners, Warriors, the NFL draft. I did a couple videos today on one on the Oakland A's and how cheap they are. But basically, we're going to do a lot of football, a lot of NFL, a lot of Niners, we're going to do a mock draft on Monday. We'd love to have you on sometime to do a mock draft with us, and a Niner 100%. Mock draft. We'll definitely do that. We'll set that up after this is done. And, the Krueg Show, go to YouTube, type in the Krueg Show, Krueg show, and follow. Should be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Definitely. And guys, click the link in the description. Go hit up Larry. Go follow him on Twitter as well. Great Twitter follow. Larry, again, thank you for you for coming on.
Yeah.
And for sure. We'll link up later after this.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Have a good night.